Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see all your faces. Hope you're having a great week. I am really excited for today's session. Um, so, Pranab, I think you're in our 2022 cohort, if I'm not mistaken. So, you're actually going to be, I think, one of our first alumni guest speakers, which is amazing. Um, and the reason that I'm so excited to have you on today is something that I've been thinking about, and we hear from students all the time that people feel like there's this choice they have between like feeling stressed and amped up and getting stuff done versus being regulated, being tuned into your body, and like staying calm essentially. And I feel like what you guys are exploring and what you've created almost pokes holes in that and makes it impossible to stand up. So yeah, welcome. It's so great to have you here. Maybe do you want to start off by just sharing where did this emerge from? Like, what is some of your personal background and history that that gave rise to what you're doing now?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Good to see everyone here. Um, yeah, so I did nervous system mastery, I think it was either 2022 or 2021.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely one of the first cohorts. And it really did change my perspective on the way I live my life in terms of seeing things always having a nervous system component to it. Like, oh, am I activated? Am I regulated? Am I sort of in a down mode? And that was really helpful. Around that time, so a little bit before that time, and over these last few years, I've gotten deep into a lot of contemplative practices, meditation. My main meditation teacher is Michael Taft, who I think is coming on next week, right? As
He's
a
next week. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think I saw that. That's super exciting. So I love his stuff. He's great. Um, I've sort of traversed a bunch of different traditions and retreats and worked with somatic work, all this sort of stuff. Um, and well, I'll get into it a bit more in the presentation. But I always found that there was still sort of this weird gap where it felt separate from my work life. I think a lot of people talk about integration, about
yeah.
bringing these things into your daily life, and I think like even to relationships, to friendships, conversations, that alone very powerful, very important, and needed. But it still felt like there was a gap with my work day
Hmm.
and on the task level. Um, and roughly, I guess 2 years ago now, I had a project, a client project that I was, oh, and this whole time I was also working for various startups, early stage startups in technology and health. So 2 years ago, I had this task for a client that I just was important but not urgent, and I pushed it off for like months. And it's that one thing that's like it's in the back of my head all the time that I was sort of always a little bit worried about, but I'll do it later. I'll do it later. And I tried my whole bag of tricks on it, and I could sort of talk about it in a session with the coach. I could meditate upon it, and it would feel much better. But when it hit sort of like the workday of my working hours, it just never really. I couldn't prioritize it, or I wanted to do it, but I kept for some reason pushing it away, pushing it away. So I ended up just asking a coach friend of mine to sit there on Zoom while I sort of and to do the emotional practices that are, nervous and regulating, while also doing the work at the same time and just sort of toggling back and forth between them. And it just blew my mind. I was like, oh wow, this actually helps. And I got it done with like 5% of the stress that I thought it would take, and I didn't die. And I just wanted a way to do that more and more often. So since then, I've sort of been always thinking about this kind of thing. Um, and I launched Attention Copilot as a service about 10 months ago now, 9 months ago. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I will pass the mic over to you. I'm super excited to learn today as well. And yeah, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. So, and Johnny, feel free to jump in if you have any questions or anything. I tend to oh, two things. If anyone has questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We can address those afterwards. I kind of like afterwards seeing it live going. And John, if you have anything you want to jump in on, feel free. I love having dialogue as we do this.
Great. Yeah, yeah, we'll do.
Yep, and we'll have time for official Q&A after the slides. So yeah, Attention Copilot is all about what happens to your nervous system when you sit down and work. So my background, as I said, deep into all the contemplative practice stuff. Um, and I also, after working at technology companies, ended up working at some pretty cool companies in the wellness sort of nervous system space, so to speak. One is Odyssey. So Odyssey connects people to legal psychedelic therapy in Oregon and Colorado. So I was one of the first hires, and we help people work with licensed practitioners in these states to do psilocybin work legally above ground for deep emotional healing and various things there. I also worked for Journey, which teaches this thing called jhana meditation, which is really sort of about being fluent with the nervous system to access these sort of bliss states that come from being really collected on attention. Um, and I think, yeah, Johnny's had some of the founders on the podcast. And yeah, I got to work at both these places, get involved in sort of the protocols, but also the business side, and really see just like how much transformation could happen for someone and sort of like how big experiences are possible, uh, large shifts are possible. Um, and fundamentally, they come down to understanding the nervous system and working with your interiority. However, I also realized that while these transformative experiences are really powerful, the real test is in daily life. I think a lot of people have experiences where they go on these big retreats, and it really can be life changing. But there's still sort of this gap, this almost gap between like the peak of what happened and like your baseline day to day stuff. Um, and I think the thing that we do, the only thing that we do more than sleep as like a long chunk of time is work. And it felt like there wasn't enough talked about in terms of sort of frames, views, and even practices to sort of do that. Like, how do we kind of bridge the stuff that we learn from these big practices in the moment of work on sort of a 10-minute basis, a 1 hour basis? And I hope by the end of this call, you'll have a deeper sense of sort of the framework that I'm working with and just a way to think about the way to think about practices that basically, as you go through the rest of the course, as you do other things in the rest of your life, it'll all stack and be even more powerful in the moment of work. And two, I'll actually give you a couple uh, practical tips and tools to do it yourself. So I kind of already talked about the origin story, but just to sort of reiterate, yeah, it was something I sort of stumbled into where I ended up working with a friend. She specifically worked with the modality internal family systems, IFS. But really, um, from there, I realized like any sort of so I paid for this session, and then afterwards, I was like, well, I'm in a really chronic stress mode in my life right now. I had a bunch of family stuff going on. I had a bunch of work stress. I was really over constrained, and I use that word over constrained internally. Like I was getting close to burnout. It was really tough. It was really tense, and externally, like I really committed to too many things more than the actual time I had, and I just didn't really know what to do. And from like a couple months of experimentation, I sort of stumbled upon what would now be the Attention Copilot method, and doing so really helped me actually just get through a hard time, work for some of those companies that I mentioned to you earlier, um, and just sort of have a strong basis of how all these things slot together and how to sort of bridge the inner and outer in one sort of cohesive framework. So, again, learning how to work with your nervous system prepares you to do it in real time in the moment of the trigger. So oftentimes when we sort of reflect on things or process things, it's sort of in the past. It's stuff that happened in the past, maybe a month ago, or we reflect back on it, or we're sort of catching it like, oh man, yeah, yes, last week was pretty tough. Or like, oh, last month was really out of it. How can we get that reflection time to be faster and faster, quicker and quicker, to be like, oh, right now, a minute ago, I just got triggered. Oh, what can I do about that? How do I respond right now? Versus sort of allowing that trigger to kind of unfold and kind of seize over and take over. We all know what it's like when we're not really our best selves, when we're hangry, we're sort of, blended with emotion. How can we catch that sooner and sooner? And I think it's really interesting to do that in the domain of work. It, of course, applies to relationships, it applies to any other activity we do. But work is sort of interesting because there's almost this taboo thing of work, but that's just like that's where I use my brain and I don't have to feel anything. But actually, it's surprisingly powerful how opening up into feeling can make your work and your thinking much better. So I'll get into that as well. So the first is we'll talk about the three layers of work. So work is much more than just simply doing a task. There's the middle layer of execution, which is doing the task, and that's writing, coding, speaking, whatever you imagine your work is. This is what people mean when they talk about it. But for a lot of people, they think that's the whole picture. That's like, oh, I just got to work more. I just got to like work harder, push harder. It's a matter of willpower. Just like push, push, push. And that's clearly not the case. It's clearly there's something missing there, and that's where we get into working smart. This upper layer of work, the meta layer of work. And whenever you hear productivity advice, that's where everything starts, but also it's where everything stops. So people talk about systems, strategy, prioritization, like the Eisenhower matrix, like Pomodoro technique, like all these various things on sort of, even lifestyle design, working smart, not hard. Amazing, really good, really important, but that's not enough. Beneath all of that is the nervous system. Beneath all of that is what's happening emotionally and somatically in the body while you work, sort of in the moment to moment experience. And it's the layer that no one really talks about, but it determines if these other two can even happen. It sort of determines if can you really, think strategically? Are you really working on what's important? Are you doing what's meaningful? And I think there's actually a way to sort of weave the three together to have a really nice positive loop between all of them. Where once you kind of get into the mode of the habit of sort of seeing like work in this way, you can really just kind of like be much more resourcing and then eventually more agentic, which is a buzzword these days, but I actually think is meaningful. Um, Great. So diving into the emotional side, we'll do that for a slide. Work is deeply emotional. First, on the first level, are we running towards or running away from the task at hand? There's a way of thinking of running in like a sort of a positive way of like, oh, you're, happily, but here I'm sort of meaning it in terms of like, are you just like gripping towards it? Like you feel like you have to do something, or are you really just avoiding it? Or you're like, I don't want to get anywhere near that. And that can come on a really fundamental level. And this maps to some of the stuff you learned last week, I believe, on sort of, upregulated, downregulated, or you sort of constantly in fight mode or flight mode. Um, and there's some questions you can ask, like, are you overwhelmed? Is there activation? How's it showing up? And that's the fundamental thing to notice. And it gets quite deep. If there is stuff happening, and this is, and there might be a little bit, but the opposite of this is flow, is presence, is sort of when we're sort of spacious, aware, grounded, resourced. There's not really much running or sort of ripping happening. We're just kind of there, and that's where I would say the best work happens. If there is activation, behind that, there's a really interesting frame that I like to say use, which is, do you see the competing wants that cause the mental tension? So whenever you're running or activated, there's that nervous system activation. You could also call that mental tension. There's sort of like a feeling of heaviness in your head or gunkiness or just sort of friction. Um, and it's actually really helpful to see it as inner conflict. So underneath the nervous system level, we have, if we kind of feel into it, there's a way of viewing it where you can see that a part of you wants to do something and a part of you doesn't. There's sort of an inner struggle. There can be an inner sort of like, I kind of want to, I kind of don't. You can just call it ambivalence. It can go all the way up to inner conflict. Sometimes there's a simple like one, like, just two things there. Like I kind of want to, kind of don't. Other times for really difficult stuff, it can be really complex. Like maybe there's an email that you've been procrastinating for a while for a client, or to your manager or to a friend. And then there's sort of, at first you kind of avoid it because like, I had to think a lot for that email. I'll just put it away for later. And then like 2 weeks later, you're like, oh man, I really got to do it. I got to think. But also I feel really bad because this person, I should have sent it a while ago. But also should I just, if I send it now, there's like all these layers of various, you can call them wants. Um, and we often label these things as shoulds. But behind every should, there's truly a want, which is a bunch of stuff on top of it. So it's helpful to see what's behind it, how can we kind of work with it, navigate it, and reduce the mental tension. There's a lot there we can say. And then the third is how do we shift into more okayness? So you'll learn a lot of practices in NSM on shifting your nervous system state that can go really deep. They can go, there's lots of depth to this. Um, but in the moment, how do you actually welcome the resistance? How can you see the kind intent behind inner conflict? And then how can you shift into more spaciousness, okayness with everything that's happening, and then move back into the actual task? So there's kind of this whole process there. Back to the meta level. So when we're emotionally clear, so doing all this, if we do all this stuff, we'll get into more okayness. And we'll feel more clarity. Whenever people often use the word, I feel stuck. There's stuckness. I'm like, I'm kind of stuck on something. That means there's something on the emotional level that's like quite literally like clogged in the pipes. So when you clear that up, you can feel you feel more clear, and you can actually get strategic about stuff. So the first is our mental RAM, sort of like all the things you're thinking about in your brain. It's often at a pretty high capacity. Um, And if you have a lot of emotional stuff, like I should, I shouldn't, that's taking up a lot of RAM. So even clearing that, and I'll talk about the process for that, even clearing that will open up sort of cognitive capacity to just do thinking, like really good thinking. In addition to that, we often have like a bunch of tasks tactically that are just sort of there all the time. We treat our brain like a to-do list. We treat sort of like how we have a bunch of half-formed decisions kind of going on all the time that we're almost waiting that will make, they're waiting for them to be made for us. And we're just sort of walking around with a bunch of gunk, uh, all very important, but just kind of consuming bandwidth and not really sort of placed where they need to be. And clearing frees up the capacity to actually do really important thinking to kind of move forward and think strategically. The second thing is that meta work is real work. So when I say meta work, these are sort of executive skills. These are sort of like, hey, like first principle thinking or all this sort of strategic thinking. What does success look like? What are we trying to do here? What's the goal? Um, you know, choosing your approach. What are the next actions? Even just actually defining them and being clear on the roadmap of what you're trying to do. This sounds sort of junior, like, oh yeah, I was in college, like, oh, I learned that, in school or something. Um, but it's what's interesting is when we're at sort of high mental load or even a lot of emotional stuckness, we just don't do this. And it's actually really helpful just to turn it into a list of like, what does success look like here? What are next actions? And for big and small decisions, doing this kind of thing, it may take 5 minutes, it may take 20 or 30 minutes. Um, that alone is really, really helpful and actually can just speed up the entire thing. Like, I think we've all been in meetings where it's like, hey, what's the point of why we're here? Are we just spinning in circles? What are we doing here? And just taking some time to define it can be really important. And the funny thing is, defining it is actually emotionally challenging. Sometimes, like, actually sticking down to, like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Activates stuff of like, oh, yeah, what am I doing here? What is the point? And there's sort of debate of different things, and there's like some emotional tenseness to it. So that's another way that emotions work here. And then we do all this, and like, what's the point, right? We're not like, why are we talking about work? And again, just to bring it home, we're just trying to do what actually matters. This is not in service of productivity, hustle culture. We're not trying to do infinite things or sort of be in grind mode all the time, and just treat this thing as just another way to sort of like get 50 hours of work done in 10 hours or something. That might actually happen, funny enough. But it's more about doing what's meaningful and important. And that's usually the emotional and challenging thing. It's the thing you've been avoiding, the thing that is important, but like you just keep pushing it away because it just feels hard to confront. And that's where the nervous system layer comes back in. So you can see how the meta layer and the emotional layer really support each other. And when we think about growth, when we think about career growth, when we think about personal growth, that tends to happen when we sort of are able to lift heavier and heavier emotional weights. Like when you were, at the start of your career, what was really hard is probably really easy for you now. And what does like hard mean at work? It usually means there's a really big story, there's a big like emotional nervous system load when we think about doing a thing. And now we're like, oh, I could totally manage that project or code this thing or write that essay. Um, and we think about learning and progress, we often focus on like the task, but really it's about a relationship to the task. Can we have a more confident, more sort of energetic relationship to it? And all these practices immediately directly support that. Yeah, and this, we're still kind of workshopping this, but our version of locked in is opened up. One thing I've heard to say, my co-founder Sam is actually in the call as well, so he'll say hi at some point in the Q&A. But anyways, he came up with opened up as sort of like this different way of working, and so locked in, we all kind of refer to that it's like narrow grinding focus, um, super almost like horse blinders on. But and, that's not bad. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's typically willpower dependent. And it's often disconnected from your why of work. It's like, okay, what's the point? Like, what are you doing? Why does it matter? It's more just like get locked in, just get it done. There's a vibe of sort of like caffeine, ignoring your signals for rest, skipping meals, and it kind of can lead to burnout. It's not sustainable. And what's really interesting is it usually requires a good day. If you wake up and you're like, I'm not going to be locked in today, you a lot of people just sort of throw it away, like, whatever, I'll just do whatever. Um, but we think there's a better way. And if you work more opened up, that's really about having an open awareness of your body and emotions while working. It's about being connected to your body, your posture, your breath, and your values. It's connected both sort of physiologically and sort of emotionally, spiritually in that way. And it's sustainable. It's not at the expense of your health and well-being. So it's very responsive to what you need in the moment um, versus reactive. And it's available at any starting case state. I think this is where it's in some ways the most important, whether you're sort of waking up tired, waking up angry, you sort of get thrown off, you're in a time of chronic stress, you're having a kid, you're having a health issue. Um, I think this way of working responds responsively to all those things in a way that just both feels better, sort of lightens up the inner critic that we often have for ourselves, and helps us get more done of what matters. So that's sort of our vision for why this matters and is important. Um, maybe now let's just stop for any questions, if that works, Johnny, because that was a lot of theory, and we'll get into practice in a minute.
Yeah, yeah, this is so great. So I have a couple of brief questions.
Hmm.
One of them, just on that last point there, the idea that you can be opened up even when you're tired, exhausted, drained. Can you kind of speak more to that? Because I think that might be counterintuitive to people.
Yeah. So it's unintuitive, but basically, oftentimes when we're sort of drained, tired, all that sort of stuff, we think that it's sort of a given in terms of how bad we feel. It's like, oh, I woke up bad, or I'm had low sleep, or I'm just kind of sick. That's done. We often don't realize the component that we bring to that situation in terms of mental tension. There's almost always a psycho-emotional aspect to it of the view that we have
Hmm.
to our experience. Are we sort of gripping onto it? Is there sort of a way of seeing things that's like, this is bad. I don't like this. I'm pushing, pulling, the kind of pushing, pulling on experience that I think a lot of meditation training shows you, that is actually much more relevant than we think. There's actually a way that you can kind of have 4 hours of sleep, be really tired in the morning, and then realize you're actually the reason you feel so bad is because you're pushing away tiredness. And by, I don't, weirdly enough, welcoming in that tiredness, maybe there's like 3 minutes where you're kind of, a little bit more sleepy, but you actually can feel a lot more awake and refreshed. And often there's like, oh, I don't want to be tired. I need to stay awake. There's this whole inner conflict going on. And the whole idea is basically understanding the inner conflict and welcoming it in, like welcoming in experience makes everything a lot better. And that's what opens you up.
Yeah, beautiful. Really, really great answer.
Thank you.
Julia.
First of all, great presentation or conversation. A presentation makes it seem so formal, but I'm
Yeah.
really appreciating the message you're conveying, and I appreciate the comment you made just now. To me, it's more like the resistance to it.
Mhm.
I'm curious on your thoughts around the meta piece, especially around mindsets, especially when they come from family of origin and culture of origin that
Mhm.
really look at the specific example I'll give is that work has to be hard or you have to work
Mhm.
hard. Like work is to serve others. It's there's not enjoyment. And I find that not only in I come from Eastern Europe originally, but I
Mhm.
find it also in like Western culture, the grind. There's like pride and so much. There's like the positive behind that grind and to think of work in a different way. It's almost, I'm working with shifting the mindset that it has to be difficult, it has to be the grind. And
Mhm.
inherently, that builds in that locked in state that is
Mhm.
so familiar, but I'm challenging that essentially what I've been brought up with.
Mhm. Great. Super good question. So I would say there's sort of a short time scale that we'll talk about, and then the long term time scale. So long term, I think like when we think about healing and sort of supporting these like working through old frames, old scripts, going to new scripts, there's a lot we can do there, right? We can kind of learn about them and be like, oh yeah, that's an insight, and eventually we sort of feel into them, and over time it goes from something that we just kind of conceptually know to something we feel to something we embody day to day and actually can like work with. That's sort of the progression of how insights typically work. The way that Attention Copilot works is right now in this moment, what's the script? Let's say you're like pulling up let's say you have a thing at work and you're like, I got to send this tomorrow. In this moment, what's the part of you? How strong is the part of you that's like, this is hard work. This needs to be grind. And how strong is the part of you that's like, oh, it can be enjoyable. It can be useful. It's very like moment to moment. And there's a way of sort of doing inner dialogue and sort of inner check-ins with sort of the introspection stuff you learned this week that actually can kind of show you like right now, what's coming up, you know? And basically, if you just kind of shift every little moment of right now a little bit more, then over the course of like days, weeks, months, it kind of can shift over time. The idea is moving away from the story of all of it to like the what's right now, the experience of that script. How helpful is that?
That resonates. I would say I'm at the translation from the script to the felt sense to the embodiment
Yep.
is what I'm deeply trying to lean into. And sometimes for someone who loves to think and be cerebral, I want to think my way there, and I'm trying to like break that pattern too.
Yep. And I will say, like, thinking is great, right? So I'm not against thinking. That's why the meta level's really helpful. And one thing I would suggest there is like at the end of every week, you could say, "How was it this week? Like, how much was I in this or that?" And seeing that it's not exactly a switch, right? It's sort of it's a gradual. There's a scale to it. And over time, you can kind of move that scale again and again. The way to really have that be long lasting and change is sort of all the stuff you're learning in the course of the in the moment somatic felt thing of it. But you don't have to like throw away your brain. Like it's actually really helpful to do the reflection.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Julia. And Kate, do you have a question?
Uh, yeah, I guess my question is, what if there's a lot of external pressure? What if there are deadlines or someone being really unreasonable, like
100%.
kind of like transferring their sense of existential urgency on you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the most common objection I get when I talk about this stuff is, well, sometimes I just have to do stuff and like my workplace is hard, my manager sucks, or maybe not that bad, right? But like there's just normal pressures and constraints of daily life, even just I need to make money, to have all this sort of things. I will say this is a lot easier when you can own your own schedule and can like construct your own environment and do all that stuff. That just is the case. And there's a lot we can do even when we're in environments. Um, in some ways, it is more challenging. I think the default way that we typically approach those kind of things are, all right, let me just shut down my feelings and just do it and then recover afterwards. That actually sometimes might be needed. The key is just being aware that that's happening and that there is a toll for that. And that's a toll that you need to kind of rest and recover from. And that's how you sort of have, instead of sort of like going on autopilot for a few years and then having this big burnout, you can actually just be aware and make micro adjustments. Um, and it sort of gives you sort of the awareness and even insight or energy and courage to be like, maybe I need to change my environment. Maybe I need to like go for a different company. Maybe I need to like have a hard conversation with my manager, um, have stronger boundaries. I think there's a whole thing that sort of in like uh, sort of emotional boundaries and sort of um, that emotional work side of thing that can be helpful there. But the key step is awareness, and I think just being aware of all that is really helpful. Um,
I
yeah.
sorry, this is Sam, Pranab's co-founder.
Yes, go for it, Sam.
I,
Yes.
as someone who's had a long career with many difficult people, I think also it's especially if that person is your superior, it's very hard to uh, not have their anxiety transferred over to you. But if you can develop a practice as you're working, which is what we're talking about, where you're able to find a place of groundedness kind of within yourself and you're able to uh down regulate and shift into a space where you feel like safe and at home and okay in your own body and in yourself, and you kind of have this little like fortress, then your boss or the environment, they're not gonna, I mean, unless you're truly in hell, looking over your shoulder every single moment of every single day and like watching you work. And so I do think that there are ways to discover rest in the moment through somatic practices, through breath work, et cetera, everything that Johnny's teaching you, um, where it's like, okay, in this hour, 5 hours, day, 10 minutes, Like I'm going to have my own little world, my force field where if I use the transference of pressure from my boss to myself and that becomes my fuel, then I'm going to burn myself out and I'm going to feel bad. But I can allow that person to have that anxiety. Obviously, I still need to deliver because I have a job and I have deadlines, but that I myself can relate to who I am and to my work and to the way that I'm working in a healthier way for me.
Yep. Thanks, Sam.
Cool. Thanks all.
Sweet.
One more question from Colin. Is that cool?
Yep.
Great. Hey, Colin. I'm looking forward
Hello.
to it.
So, what I'm trying to think how to phrase the question. Flow state is a place that I would try to get into, and you've talked all around it, but I don't think you actually mentioned flow state. But I also worry a lot about how to have the skill of managing my mental and emotional states to kind of funnel myself into a flow state.
Mhm.
So I see being driven by external forces causing a lot of tension and you feel you have to work hard. That's one state that you might be in. I think you've shown us that you could actually transition that all the way to a comfortable, familiar state. You kind of feel you have everything in control and you could kind of just work, but without intensity. So it's those are like extremes. But I also find that you have my goal is to get into a flow state where you kind of set those things aside at both ends of the spectrum and said, let's get to work. And that has its own emotional uh, kind of a pool that you're in that you just feel like everything is going. It's flow. It's like the difference between being in the rapids on a soft, lazy river or a nice, quickly moving stream, which is the flow state that I'm trying to get to. And part of my reason here is to develop the skills, the practices to transition from one state to another. Because if you feel you've developed that, you can feel in more control
Mhm.
and can put yourself in the appropriate state for what you need to accomplish. I was
Mhm.
just wondering how you feel about all that.
100% endorse. I think a way we could talk about all this stuff is flow state. We tend to not, just because flow means so many different things to different people, and in sort of like flow science, we sort of have some different disagreements with it. But we think what we're doing is basically we're helping, like, the process that we're about to go into will help you find a flow regardless of how you feel going into it. Yeah, I'm curious, Colin, like, what are the things that sort of stop you from feeling flow typically, or make flow easier or harder generally?
Stress, emotional, outside pressures,
Yep.
inside pressures and drives, feeling I must do things. I am ADHD and autistic, so executive functioning is my biggest difficulty. And I'm trying to develop the skills they don't come natural to me. So I feel they're things I must practice and develop.
100%. So plus one there. I feel like I've had ADHD a lot of my life. Sam's been diagnosed with ADHD, and that's why I think we've both really jumped to this sort of method as helpful for both of us. Um, so yes, so I think so. A more charitable version of the locked in thing on that slide is this sort of flow state. Like, there's sort of locked in sort of a negative way, but there really is this like beautiful thing of being in flow focused. The thing is, even that sort of is reliant on feeling like everything's going well. Like, things are good, you're feeling good, you're not too difficult, there's sort of appropriate size challenges. So what do you do when it's kind of thrown off? There's not really like a tractable, like, well, what do I do now? You kind of just hope for the best, I guess. And I think the practice that we're about to present will sort of help you get into a flow state regardless of how you're feeling. If you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling like you have to do something, um, we think that there are things you can do then. They're not easy, but as a habit you can build to reliably enter that flow state more on command, every day, even.
I also feel it's important to be able to transition out of flow state and come back into the real world and kind of
Mhm.
you need a break because that is an intense state. You are using up a lot of mental and even emotional energy. You are totally wrapped up in what you're doing.
Yep.
And being able to kind of come out of it, relax, and then kind of get back into the real world and start talking to people again. Because usually when I'm in flow state, it's very much me attacking a goal. And when I come out of it, it's like, oh, you know, it's like a storm clearing, and it's like, well, okay, where am I now? So
Yep.
so the transition out of it is as important as into it, because otherwise, if I don't deal with that well, I tend to shut down, and it is just I'm exhausted, and I just want to. I've been all alone working hard, and then I'm all alone trying to recover, and it takes transition to just get back into the real world and talk to people and get back to whatever a normal day is.
100%. So that's where, and this is sort of hard to transmit, but I think there are many different types of flow. And I would say that's one type of flow. Another type of flow is this more opened up flow, where actually those things don't really happen as much. Like you actually can be in a flow that's receptive to sort of someone opening the door and interrupting you, sort of, oh, I got to go to the bathroom now or eat food and emotions. And we're trying to see if we can kind of help practices that lead to that experience more often.
Yeah, and there's other experiences like an amazing conversation with one-on-one, or even a group dynamic, or a meal with your family. That those are all states where you feel attentive and focused, and hopefully enjoying what you're doing.
100%. Sweet.
All right,
Thank you,
thank you,
Colin.
Colin. All right, do you want to
Yep,
continue? Yep, awesome.
we'll dive into it. Cool. So now let's get into the practice. Um, so yes, how do we actually work in an attention copilot way? How do we work in a way that leads to these effects we talked about? Um, there are 3 steps. One is grounding and connection. First, so that it's generally about settling into the body, getting into sensation level experience, which I'll talk more about. And this is basically the step where you can just use any of the techniques you've learned in NSM that work for you. Um, Vu-hum breathing, any other sorts of things, the stuff that'll come in the next few weeks, anything that works can sort of functionally fit into this grounding and connection step. This is also where there's a lot of practices people have. Like if you have a personal spiritual practice, you could do this here. If you have a personal emotional practice or a meditation practice, whatever kind of practice that gives you grounding and connection, you can do here. If you're in a group, you could do a sort of dyadic emotional thing that you, I think that was done this week for the interoceptive stuff. I've been following along the syllabus, Johnny, so I'm trying to incorporate those in. But anyways, this is essentially where you can slot whatever you want in here, but the function of it is grounding and connection. Next is clearing and prioritization. So there's a concept called open loops. So these are all the things that are sort of floating around your head. You're going to see what that is in a minute, and just write them down. And this is sort of how do you kind of get from the swirl of all the things you could be doing to like the 1 or 2 things you want to do in the next 10 to 30 minutes. That's what this step's all about. How do you clear your head? How do you prioritize? How do you actually kind of like decide what to do today? That's a lot of work and a lot of effort. It actually does take some mental capacity. That is a learnable skill and a thing you can train. Within that, you can kind of do things like, we'll get into it in a bit, but like defining success for them and creating the next actions, all that sort of stuff. And you can see 1 and 2 sort of map to the emotional layer and the meta layer of work. And step 3 is work copiloting. So this is really interesting. We're going to have another slide where we talk about this, but this is basically doing your actual work while maintaining awareness of your body, your emotions, and your attention. There's a couple techniques here I'll dive into, but it's essentially about sort of working with a lot of reflection and catching the moments of stuckness more and more often, and having a practice to sort of write down when you're getting stuck and sort of move back to the task at hand, sort of like a meditation for work or working while meditating. We're not saying this is how you need to work all the time, but when things are really sort of like do your day-to-day stuff, the way that you can kind of do this is if, oh man, I'm noticing that like this is kind of challenging or these kinds of things I tend to get stuck on, you can block off 1 or 2 hours and work in this specific way and just practice it. And we're fleshing out sort of the method to do it by yourself. Currently, we find the best ways to do it with we have coaches in our organization that know this stuff and help you do it together. And today we're going to do it as a group, sort of as a mini practice. So that third thing, work co-piloting. What does that look like? What does that mean? What are we actually doing differently while we're working? Because we are actually going to do something like pretty weird that you typically haven't done before while you're working. So the first is the biggest thing, externalization. So what we have people do, and what it means to work in a Copilot way, is basically talking out loud to yourself as you're doing a thing. So you can either talk out loud or you can write it on like a separate notepad. So very practically, you can have your work screen on, let's say you have a Google Doc that you're like doing a task in. You can have another Google Doc or notepad that's called a scratch pad where you can just write down your thoughts. You could have a journal on the side of your laptop, or you could just talk out loud to like a AI recorder or something, or to someone who's listening to you. But we're basically narrating out loud your actions, your intentions, your decisions. And this literally, what it does is raise your awareness so you can tell when something's off. For example, I might be writing an email. Let's say my plan is I need to go into Gmail and send an email that I've been avoiding for a week. So what you'll do is, okay, I'm now going to open up Gmail. I'm noticing I feel kind of tense in my neck and my shoulders. I'm going to take 10 seconds. Great. I'm going to open up Gmail. I'm going to click the thing and I'm going to do that. Oh, I just noticed that my mind is wandering to here. Oh, I just noticed that I want to go do that thing. I'm going to not do that thing and do the first thing instead. You're sort of, I'm breaking that now. So you're sort of narrating all the different things that are happening and slowing down the mind to actually catch the moments that are sort of normally you just sort of collapse into it and just immediately like do 5 different things instead of doing one different thing. Basically talking out loud to yourself, step by step. When you do that, you'll notice when something catches. You'll notice the urge to check your phone. If you've done this after the grounding, you'll notice sort of like, oh, I really want to go on Twitter right now, or like, this feels really annoying, or I'm noticing this really sucks. You may catch that you're rewriting a sentence like 9 times. That shows that there's not like a thinking thing there. There's actually a decision to be made, or something sort of like challenging there. Yes, I saw in the chat. Yes, Whisper AI. So I think AI tools can be really helpful here. And it really is similar to like noting practice in meditation or labeling practice in meditation. So it's very, very related. And you're aware of the activation as it's happening. When you do that, you can give it 10 or 20 seconds and actually just return to the part of you that's feeling a bit more grounded. You can get curious about the sensations outside of a story. You can sort of just hang out with yourself and just give yourself a little bit of pause and breathing room. Almost just that one layer, it's just like a mindfulness practice for work. Just 10 seconds, noting that. Just doing that means you're a little bit less reactive, a little bit more present. And you'd be surprised at like the ideas that come up, creativity that comes up, all this sort of stuff. And if you want, this is where you actually can kind of, when you're working with a more, sort of experienced coach, or if you have deeper practices yourself, you can kind of just do those deeper practices like IFS or somatic experiencing or various intense meditation things. And that'll sort of get you into a bit more presence and clarity, and you return to the task. There's a bunch of stuff here, like what if it's too much? What if it's too intense? What if it's not changing? We can talk about all that. And then the major thing is reflect. So at the end of a work block, let's say 25 minutes or 50 minutes, just step back. How'd that feel? What'd you notice? What did you like? If you're kind of setting aside 2 hours to work in this way, you can reflect on the process of, I learned that when I actually pause, I realized I always have an urge to check my Twitter when this thing happens. And you're like, oh, wow, that's an interesting pattern. I didn't realize that this is what was causing me friction and stress. You might realize, like, as we worked with some people that they're working with various coding agents, And every time they're waiting for their code agent to load, they sort of immediately check Slack and email, and that just makes them really tired at the end of a 30-minute thing. And they're like, "Oh, if I just didn't do that for 30 minutes, that level of context switching, I'd feel much better." So that reflection, I think, can be really helpful. Um, and that is sort of the whole step. So does anyone have, we'll just do maybe like 3 minutes of questions before we go into an actual practical thing where you'll actually kind of do a little bit of work in a Copilot way, and we'll bring it home and have some Q&A at the end. Um, yeah. So, well, Johnny, are you okay to open up for like 3 more minutes of
Yeah,
questions?
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I also have a brief question as well.
Sweet.
What you mentioned earlier, kind of finding flow regardless of how you're feeling. Maybe that's what you're about to go into with the practice, but maybe speak to that a little bit more because I think that's probably going to like break people's brains a little bit. I hope.
Yeah, it's challenging. So the thing that we can't promise every time, but you will get better and better. Um so yes. So basically that's where this level, this like this step three thing comes in. Pause, ground, return. So you can think of it as sort of like I really like that video you put out with sort of heart meters. So
Mm,
if you're, let's say let's assume you're doing really well. Let's assume like you had a great retreat, a vacation, you're coming into work and like you're killing it. You're awesome. You're feeling great. When does that switch into getting stressed by work? Typically, that might happen over the course of minutes or hours. And if you can catch that before it happens, before it builds up, and you can kind of intervene and give yourself more rest and relief,
mhm.
and if you can do that moment to moment, you will feel really good as you work. Um, there's some more theory and stuff I could talk about here, but let's say that's sort of like that's one. If you're coming in kind of already overwhelmed, overconstrained, you're like, ah man, things are just really hard. It is quite challenging to do this by yourself, to kind of access this like deep flow and enjoyment right away. That's where I'd recommend sort of working with someone who's trained or sort of having a more supportive experience there.
Mm.
Because it is just a skill. It's a skill to be learned, and that you're kind of starting off on like you're starting off on a hard note if you're doing that. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
but that's where I think it's that pause, ground, return, and the noticing as the stress building up and reducing it, titrating almost while you work. Yep.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the mental model that I have it is like that heart meter could almost be, let me just add myself to the heart meter is almost like how much energy or ATP is available. And as you
Yes.
have less available metabolic resources, the quicker the reactivity and the mental tension will kind of go in.
Yes.
So it's like if you have more energy, you have more capacity. And if you have like, 2 hours sleep and less
Yes.
ATP, then
Yes.
it'll just grasp a lot quicker.
Yep. And it's like we're not. It's if you have like 2 hours of sleep and you just have to get work done. Hey, sometimes you just gotta like kind of chug some coffee, get a Red Bull, and just get it done, and then just make sure you're sort of getting a good night of rest that evening.
Mhm.
But often when we're in that low sleep state, we're sort of making decisions that are worse for us. We're sort of procrastinating more,
Yeah.
we're pushing more, and then we end up not really recovering the way we need to. So
Mhm.
this is sort of in the long run gets us into creating these habits that sort of are long-term healthy.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Any other questions? Nope. Okay,
Cool.
feel free to keep going.
Um, Great. So yeah, Hannah has a well, that's a cool comment. We can talk about it maybe at the end. But it is interesting. Great. So we're gonna do a little exercise. Um, so we're going to do 5 minutes of grounding. So we'll do some grounding. Then afterwards, I'll have you guys open up a notepad or doc to do some writing, and then we'll just see what happens. So great. I'm gonna lead like a probably actually about probably 10 minutes of guided meditation here. Great. So, all right. Get ready and sort of, if you can, get into a more relaxed state. Hmm. Settle in. And the thing we'll do with this grounding is we'll have it be a little bit interactive. So, a couple times I'll have you open your eyes, maybe type something in the chat, and then go back to closing your eyes. So, just know that I'll ask for that. Hmm. So just settling into your experience. Breathe deep into whatever feels good. See if you can notice physical contact of your legs on the seat, maybe your hands or other parts of your body with the room. And just see if you can drop any tension that can just be dropped. Tune into your energy levels and any emotional body sensations. So energy levels are high energy, low energy, maybe any sense of joy, happiness, feeling good, maybe some tenseness or stuff you don't really like as much. Just see how much more okay you can be with all of it. And just for about 10 seconds, see if you can open your eyes and just drop 2 words into the chat of how you're feeling or what you're noticing. Just drop them in the chat and return to eyes closed. You may notice a poll to read other people's response. See if you can return to your own experience, return to your own physical and emotional body sensations. If there's any sort of tension, tiredness, anxiousness, see how much you can acknowledge it. Be like, oh, yeah, that's there. And just know you can attend to those sensations a little later on. If there's anything that feels good, anything that feels relaxed, peaceful, enjoyable, see how much more you can soften or melt into those. Even if something just feels a little bit good, see how much you can just enjoy, even savor in those sensations. Continuing to just notice what's happening. continuing to soften, melt, and welcome in whatever's there to whatever extent you can. And just tune in if there's any shift in positive sensation overall from just these last 5 or 6 minutes or so. There might be a word or phrase or image that comes to mind that just kind of indicates any increase in presence, kindness, acceptance, stillness. And just see what comes up. If there's anything that feels salient. And when you're ready, open your eyes while staying connected to that feeling and just type it in the chat if you feel comfortable. And if there's nothing that really speaks to you, just use the word softening. And for the next minute or so, see how much you can stay in connection to that word or the feeling behind that word or phrase, even eyes open. Notice how much you can feel that grounding, softening, whatever word or quality there is. And now just staying in connection to this word, open up a Google Doc or Notepad, just any sort of thing to write with. Could even be pen and paper if you want. And once you have that, for the next 3 minutes, and I'll time it and say when, for the next 3 minutes, just write down line by line all of the open loops that are in your head. So open loops are sort of, as you think about the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the to-dos, decisions, sort of the tasks or projects, maybe the ideas floating around. It could be how you feel about those things. Just write them line by line, sort of more structured free writing kind of thing. We'll just capture them for the next 3 minutes. And if you sort of feel like you're done, you can kind of just rest in the word that came up for you. And if you want a challenge mode, ignore this if you don't want a challenge mode. Literally, like close your ears or something. Um, what are you avoiding right now? Nice. And we'll come to a close for now. And if you can check back into your body sensations, notice what shifted, what's different, and just pop a word or two into the chat. Yep. So there's basically two things I see all the time. People feel more anxious and uncomfortable and more clear. And that's actually kind of the same thing. If you have bigger stuff, you'll feel more anxious at first. But the idea is the more we can welcome in that anxiousness and allow it to be there, we'll actually get to that clarity. So sometimes if it's easy mode, it might just feel clear right away. But actually, you can kind of move more towards clearness by just having this here. Um, and we'll do some a next step on this that'll help. Yeah, long and consequential open loops list. So now for the next minute or so, I would say do one of two things. If you feel pretty clear and you feel like you want to take more on, what I'd like you to do is notice the stuff. If you go through that list, mark the things that feel intense and sort of important and giving you an and just sort of mark it or bold it. And if you feel like it, you can even just write down a few things about it or sort of explore that for a couple, or actually just do that for now. If you're feeling kind of like having a hard time or like, oh man, there's a lot of stuff, just take a minute and just let go of the list a little bit and just hang out with the emotions. Just hanging out with those sensations, feeling into them, and just relax. Maybe bring up your word and let that go a little bit more. So do one of those two things. Yep. So so there's two things we could do. If you're feeling clear, then I want you to try to bring on the stress by doing the hard thing. So go through that list and notice, just mark what feels of that, any of those feel the most challenging or intense or difficult. That's one. If you're already feeling a little bit stressed and overwhelmed right now, don't do that. Instead, just hang out with your emotions, hang out with what's happening, and even just you can even journal about what you're feeling and just write about your experience. I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, and just kind of get to know your experience a little bit more. And yeah, this can be on the things that came up or the what you're avoiding list. Either the what you're avoiding list is even harder. So either of those. Okay. So we're now going to move to the next part. Everyone here has got a little bit of a different experience, which makes this a little bit different, but please keep asking questions or doing something in the chat so I can keep it personalized. There's a couple things you can do here. So we'll do this for the next maybe 5 or 6 minutes. Thinking about those principles that we talked about before, talking out loud, externalizing, noticing when something catches, pausing, grinding, returning. If you have one thing on your list, so for everyone, I'd like you to pick one thing on your list that you want to do now for the next 5 minutes. And if you're not sure what you can do, then you can just journal more about clearing. You can actually stay in the clearing step. You can keep writing about stuff going on or just kind of staying in that sort of journaling mode. But for now, if there's one task on that list you can do just for 5 minutes, we're going to try doing it in this way. So pick the task. And first, I want you to write out, what does success look like for that task? And even just below the clearing thing, write success and what success looks like. And just diving into it, after that, write out the next actions of like what the next few steps are for the thing. Maybe it's a small thing, maybe it's a big thing.
But even if it's a big thing, the actions would be smaller things.
Yep. And when you're ready, when you're clear, and for the next 5 minutes, everyone's muted. Just talk out loud as you're working and just see what that's like. I am now doing this. Just sort of narrate your goal, what the actions are as you do the task, and just see what happens. And we'll go for 5 minutes. Yeah. Halfway. See if you can keep narrating. And let's come to a close. So do what you need to do in the next 10, 20 seconds to wrap up. And see if you can return into contact with the word that you posted in the chat just earlier. See how much more, maybe eyes open or eyes closed. You can just take a few moments to return to what that word was or what that represented for you. And if you're unsure, just take a breather, breathe into your body, and just soften a little bit more. Yep. And just post in the chat what came up or what came up or even anything that you thought was interesting. Um, awesome. Yeah. So lots of interesting stuff. The key thing is that you just noticed more stuff. And it does open up some questions like, oh, what do I do with that? It seems like it's maybe bothering or a bunch of things we can talk about in the Q&A. But that was a really mini condensed Copilot session. I don't think I've ever done one this quick in this big of a group before. So I'm glad I think it went decently. Um, and yeah, thank you everyone for participating. Um, so yeah, this is just a taste. Like there's a lot here. I think yeah, see lots of stuff. I'm just used to doing this, like these patterns. So yeah, speaking out loud can amplify the sensations and make you a bit more overwhelmed. So that is the challenge of this thing. If there's a lot of underlying stuff, sometimes it actually kind of there's a reason we're pushing it down because it's actually a bit overwhelming for us. So sometimes doing this thing can be a bit too overwhelming. So like with all nervous system stuff, there's sort of cautions. We're not saying do this all the time, um, but there's various modes you can be in here. But a lot we can say. Um, let's yeah, so we already did this. Let's move to Q&A because I think a lot happened. We covered a lot of stuff, and we only have another 12 minutes. So
Carla
let's
had
get it.
one question, Pranab, that was
Oh,
in the
sure.
chat, which is should we be talking through feelings or execution as we're working?
Yeah. So this is there's an art to this, and I would say both, but part of it is knowing what's helpful for you right now. So we partly just want to kind of label the emotions. And the idea is by labeling these emotions, I actually have a slide for this in the appendix. Um, there's a study that shows simply labeling emotional body sensations will reduce autonomic nervous system reactivity. So, like interoceptively, somatically labeling is actually better than just cognitive mindfulness at reducing activity. So that's what we're doing here. We're just speaking out loud. As we're speaking out loud, we're labeling our experience. Sometimes that experience is still really overwhelming and we got to do kind of bring the big guns to it and have these bigger techniques. Sometimes it is worth getting the supervised. And there's a whole lot more I could say here. But this is sort of just a taste. Um, and yeah, and I would say like we're not trying to dig anything up. We're not necessarily needing to find the emotions. If you can work, go for it. There's sort of two modes here. One mode is your goal is really just to get stuff done, and you need to just like, hey, just notice and address the emotions as you're getting stuff done. Great. For other people, they're like, I really want to explore how I feel about this kind of thing, or it's what matters more is how I feel about this kind of task to get some insight on something. Then you can kind of stay more on the feeling side. But there's a lot of flexibility here. It's not very prescriptive. It really is sort of choose your own adventure. But there's some guidelines I can give you um, that are sort of related to a lot of the other stuff with nervous system practice.
And then I also just noticed that I'm not trying to do Johnny's job here, but I also just noticed that Henrika talked about that speaking it out loud amplified the sensation of panic. So I thought the reason why I jumped in is you have a great rubric of like getting to a 7 in intensity, but not beyond that. And if you are finding yourself to then like use the nervous system down regulation tools. So it's like, so maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Great. Yeah. And I think in the course that's there, but basically, if you're hitting, there's this concept of window of tolerance. So if you're hitting something that's really high and you're like noticing that, you don't want to keep pushing on that. You probably don't want to hang out there for too long. So do what you need to do to downshift. Maybe that's ignoring your feelings for right now. Maybe that's a breathing activity or something. But these are all, we don't, you don't want to stay at like a 7 out of 10 intensity when you're doing this for too long. Cool. Where'd Johnny go?
He handed the reins over to Sam.
Oh, you are the captain.
I put him out of a job. I will be facilitating the rest of this course.
That's so funny.
But yeah, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask live here? I think those were all the questions from the
Laura
chat.
Hey, first of all, thank you. This is fabulous. And I have a question that might not seem work related. In my mind, I make the connection, but I think it could also be compared to like, how do we work with this if we're in the middle of a meeting with other people and whatever.
Yeah.
So a couple people on this call know this. In the past year, I've decided to become a triathlete, and I do a lot of daily workouts by myself. And I generally am noticing I carry resistance with me all the time about it. like I have to do a run after this, and I've carried that, and it's heavy energy, and it takes up mental space. Like I'm not even doing the thing, and already there's real estate in my mind and body being taken up by resistance to it, much less in the process of doing the thing. So I think there's an applicability here, whether it's to that kind of experience of being in action and using co-piloting and how you've walked us through, but also being with other people in the action of doing work where we don't have the opportunity to jot a little thing down about what we're noticing in our shoulders. So can you speak, I don't mean to jump ahead, you just taught us this, but can you talk a little bit about that application?
100%. And you sort of picked up on, so both of those are really, really good. The latter one, so we're starting with work, right? But these are skills that can be used anytime, anywhere. And Sam and I have actually often talked about like life copilot as sort of what we want to do with the company at some point in the future. Social anxiety, exercise. It's really just applying these skills in real time to whatever action you're doing. So it's fully applicable anywhere. It's just that work sort of makes it a little bit easier. You have a laptop, you can write stuff. It's sort of, it's both like the stakes are high and you do it all the time. So that's why we're starting with work. But I think these skills work anytime, anywhere, for the most part. They have to be adapted a bit.
Yeah, that was going to be, is there like something you could point us to where it'd be like, this would be the point where you need to adapt a little bit this way, or?
Yeah, for sports, I think I might have missed it a little bit. Was it while you were running, or is it sort of like around the running?
All the time and during, like I can feel my body get heavy while I'm running, and I'll try to adjust my posture to bring energy up. But I think it's working partially, kind of, it's not like I have to fix it, but it's an exploration, and I'm fascinated by how it's all going up here.
So if we had like 2 more hours, we do a whole thing on experimentation. So experimentation's a whole another part of this. Like just doing this doesn't mean you get the right answer right away, but it gives you room to breathe, to experiment. So try stuff out. Now that you know that there's like an emotional layer, there's a strategy layer, what's the approach you want to take for the next like 3 runs? Maybe you want to try to be this way towards the heaviness. Maybe you want to try a different way toward the heaviness. Maybe it's better to ignore it. Maybe it's better to listen to it. Like, I don't really know. Every person's different. Generally, the idea is the more awareness, the better. So bringing awareness to whatever you're doing at a greater and greater level tends to always be better, but maybe not, you know? So that's one general principle. And on the meeting thing, that just is harder mode, I would say. So we want to practice this when we're by ourselves, when we have capacity to sort of like have some time away where we're not seen by other people. And then I think when we do it in a meeting, it's just harder when we're sort of being seen, when like people are watching us. But it's still the same thing. There's just fewer moves you can do. But I think like maybe then it's okay to rely on the old habits of just kind of doing things without awareness, you know, because opening up too much can be a little challenging.
You
So
start
that's how it
narrating,
is.
this person's a jerk.
You're
That
right.
person doesn't know what they're talking about.
In the middle of the
Yeah,
meeting.
no, but I do
Yeah.
think the habit can accumulate over time where it can become a little bit more natural. But that, I mean, Laura, your point about kind of that is something that we've talked about. If you already have a coach that you're working with, it could be interesting to experiment, kind of do a real-time experiment where you have your coach call you right as you're about to start running. And, you know, if you have like an hour of coaching per week, it's like 20 minutes is as you're about to run, or it could even be with a friend or a loved one or someone you care about, where it's just like, okay, I'm going to process my resistance. I'm going to label it. I'm going to name it. And then even as you start to run, they could sort of like stay on your earpiece, like the CIA, and, you know, and kind of, and then you can narrate your experience as you're running. So like Pranab was saying, this can be just a great area of experimentation. I think Giannis has your hand
Yep.
up. Yeah.
Hey, you're on mute.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
hello. Hi.
Hey.
Great topic and great workshop. Thank you. So I'm wondering, like, I struggle with procrastination sometimes, and I found a correlation with my energy. Like the days when I have worked out and slept well, it feels that it's easier to beat it. And other times when I'm in low energy, it kind of feels hopeless. And I'm wondering, Um, have you noticed that? Is that a thing? Is that a way when I'm in the days when I'm not so resourced to actually go through with the task without pushing?
So that's part of the frame. So when you're lower resourced, maybe the thing to do is just have more resource, or to grow, to rest
Hmm.
and get more resource. So oftentimes we sort of treat all days like they're the same. Like we compare every day to our best day. Actually, if you're feeling like having a hard time, maybe the most productive thing is to just give yourself 3 hours of rest. And having practices for rest, down regulation, restoration will actually, and just truly doing a break there will make the rest of the day far better. So that's part of this too. It's like, it's not necessarily every single time you work, you can do it. But yeah, like I did a 20-minute NSDR an hour before this because I was really tired. And that really helped. So I think that's part of this too. It's like really getting to seeing all of that as needed in our day. Because it's only one nervous system that's showing up for all these things.
Hmm. Thank you.
You got it.
Yeah, I'll
Sorry,
just
Rick. Go
piggyback
ahead.
off that before we wrap up here. I think it strikes me that there's something interesting about like almost like if this then that type protocols around like if you're tired beyond a certain level, then you do an NSDR. If the emotion that rises is like more than you can just like welcome in the moment, then maybe you do 10 minutes of processing or internal family systems to kind of go into it more deeply and unwind and then come back. Or maybe it's just welcoming and then you continue working. So I'm almost seeing these like decision trees that seem like that's part of the skill that gets built over time.
100%. 100%. Um, so I'm just gonna drop a few. Is it okay we go to closing now, Johnny?
Yeah, let's wrap up.
Great. So the last thing we'll show, so hey, Attention Copilot, this is all the methodology. We also have a business where you can work with the coach one-on-one to practice this and learn it. So I still do sessions. I do a few a week, We have 2 coaches that are deeply trained in this. We're growing the amount of coaches. You can work with us, and we have a special NSM discount if you ever like to do even just a one-off session for 10% off. So you can go to attncopilot.com/NSN. And we have one-offs, and then we often recommend if you want to like really deepen in, you can do weekly or once every month or something like that. We also over time are trying to grow the number of like formats and things that are lower cost, like resources, articles, group sessions like this, that kind of thing. I don't think we have a great way to stay plugged in, but you can follow us on Twitter, on X, and probably if there's a, if you go to we should have a way to
We got to create a newsletter, yeah.
we need a newsletter.
But also if you're interested in, or you can just email me, Sam at attncopilot.com.
Yeah.
If you want to talk further, but
yeah, we can, we're always happy to do like 15-minute calls with anyone. We work with teams. If you have a team that you think would be useful for this, awesome. And yeah, we have we've worked with over 200 people, and we've got some pretty cool sort of quotes about people who've done this kind of thing. So yeah, that's the end of it. So
Amazing. Well, thank you guys both so much for the session. I will say that I did a session with Minnow, who's one of your coaches, and it's unbelievably helpful. I've spent so many hours doing this work for myself, and it's amazing what can arise. And for me, work kind of was like a black box where the practices and the protocols just weren't really, at least not at the forefront. So I love what you guys are doing. Yeah, encourage you guys to reach out and email them, book a session if that's of interest. And yeah, Ocean will be including the show notes in here as well if there's anything in here you want to go over again. And yeah, let's close up by just sharing gratitude to Sam and Pranab. On the count of 3, let's all unmute and say thank you so damn much.
Thank you so damn
So
much.
So damn much.
So damn much.
thank you so
Amazing.
much. Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
guys.
thanks everyone.
Have a great week.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.